Wild Health is about optimizing you. We use genomics, blood work, biometrics, microbiome assessment, many other tests, and a conversation with you to come up with a full health optimization plan. What's the perfect diet, exercise, and supplement plan for you and only you? The Wild Health podcast is about optimizing all of us. Here we cover the cutting-edge science that gives you the base to be able to apply the personalized plan we give you as a patient. To sign up as a patient, go to wildhealth.com. Or if you're a physician or health coach and you want to learn how to do this for your patients, we're happy to help as well. Wildhealth.com for all the information on becoming a patient or working with us.
What's up, guys? Erin Faules with Wild Health. I am so excited to have Joel Greene on today. He is somebody that I've looked at his work for years now, read his book, The Immunity Code, back in the day. So I'm super excited to talk with him. I think you guys are going to learn a ton. So Joel was the first to bring gut health into the fitness world, authoring the community's earliest article on the microbiome in 2007 and creating the first commercially available program to target the microbiome composition for health and body composition, the VEEP nutrition system. VEEP was adopted by Fortune 500 employers, major cities, hospitals, and even featured on the Dr. Phil show. By 2013, it had amassed the largest known body of outcomes on the gut biome. He is the author of The Immunity Code, which I just referenced. Great book, by the way. You should all check it out. And The Way, as well as the creator of the immune-centric approach to health. The Immunity Code has become one of the most influential books on biohacking of all time, launching into public awareness dozens of topics like affirmantia, mouth taping, human milk oligosaccharides, and many more. These are kind of buzzwords in our community, so this is great. He has been a contributor to top nutrition companies, major publications, and leading podcasts. He's previously as a serial entrepreneur and has built 2 multi-million-dollar companies while navigating the challenges to health in real-world circumstances and learning firsthand how poorly most of the advice translates, which led him to spend the last 20 years pioneering practical solutions for controlling the body under real-life circumstances. So I think this is, in my opinion, after reviewing your work, what I've enjoyed the most. I feel like you have prioritized context and real world examples rather than rigid dogmatic guidelines for people. So I've really appreciated that personally. And I feel like it navigates to real world advice with my patients really beautifully as compared to a specific, rigid set of guidelines that they need to follow forevermore. Right. So thanks for coming on. I'm super stoked to talk with you today.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm super stoked to be on this. This is a big one. Wild health. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You had some big buzz podcasts on the Ben Greenfield show. I think this might be when I first learned about your work years ago at this point. I don't know exactly when it was. And dove into your book at that time. But you've been in this business for much longer. So I'm just personally curious what kind of drove you to being so ahead of the curve? I mean, you've talked about some of these, dietary patterns, the microbiome, now GLPs. Like, I feel like you're kind of a little bit ahead of the curve before the sensation takes on in the public. So is there a personal anecdote there if you don't mind sharing, or what drove you to be super into this space?
Well, both my parents had terrible health. One of my parents died of cancer. The other died of diabetes related
I'm
complications.
sorry.
So that was always a thing with me. It was like, okay, well, I'm not going down that road. So that was always like a core animus, I think. Apart from that, though, I just was kind of just an early adopter of so in the 70s, really, America was mostly really just fat, and I wouldn't say probably fatter now, but I mean, America was just the mainstream was not working out, exercise, and take care of yourself. That was not the mainstream, and it is now, kind of. And I was just a kid at that time, kind of, soaking it all up, and so I just imbued, everything that was there, which was, it was the running craze, it was the, pumping iron, it was, all of these different things that just started to gain a micro foothold in the culture, and so I was just a kid at that time just trying them all, and that kinda I grew up with that, but I think for me, It's funny, interesting. I just the other day I saw this uh, clip on Netflix for like the reality of The Biggest Loser, and they were showing the guy that won. I think it was like in 2012, and they were showing him on the victory thing, and he's like, "I won," and then they cut to like now, and he's back to where he was. He's 450 pounds, they end the clip with him just saying, "I wish I knew now what I didn't know then." And I think that for me probably encapsulates it, which because I was such an early adopter, I had so many miles down the road very early on that by, 2005, I had 30 plus years in of doing the shtick that we're all told to do and seeing where that really gets you. And so, quickly learned that the map, that the map is not the actual territory. That once you go down that road 30, 40 years, you find out very quickly that what you're promised isn't necessarily what you get. And that changed a lot of things for me, in the mid 2000s where I'd been running a company and, had been doing fitness and all that for a very long time and just got fat and just found that it didn't translate very well into real life. And so
You
that,
personally experienced that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
did so for me, like, I'd been really fit many times and it just didn't really translate very well into like, I mean, it works great in a bubble, works great if that's what you do for a living, but it doesn't translate for most people because the main ingredient is time. And when that's so it just doesn't translate. So for me, that just led me down this road of like, well, I didn't even know what I was looking at, but it was kind of a thing of like, well, there's something missing. I don't know what it is. I'm trying to figure out what it is. And I would say now in hindsight, it's a foundation that can always exist in your life that exists apart from all the dogma that we're taught that's time intensive. And it's something everybody needs. Everybody needs a foundation because every day you're getting older, every day you're winding down just a bit more. And so you need to be doing something every day. So the only thing we're really talking about here is what is the thing you need to be doing? What are the most
Mhm.
important things you need to be doing? Let's assume that, you know, you have a busy practice, for example. Let's assume that you're, and in fact, I know practitioners like this who work crazy hours and then their weekends are doing charts. They just work insane hours. And so you really don't have a lot of time. And so the question becomes, yeah, really, what do I fill that calendar with? And so that becomes the foundation, and then everything else is kind of, you know, ebbs and flows and comes and goes. But that I think as an ethos or as a paradigm for me, I took that and took that to heart because I had sort of given my life to the fitness stick and it didn't really work out in real life for me. So I'd say that was it.
Well, I like starting here actually, because I think a lot of people will relate to this. So if you have the elevator pitch it for yourself in the 1970s or when this whole shebang started for you, what would your pearls of advice be in terms of like real world action steps? And obviously, nuance and context really matter for each individual, and I know this is something you talk about as well. So it's going to depend on the individual, but if you had to note some overarching themes that work for you and have worked, what advice could you give yourself then?
Um, so some big themes would be that there's a few things that matter more than anything else and take no time to do. And those things are central to everything else, which is oxygenation and circulation. That kind of you sink the ship without that. So and that's something that as you age starts to go downhill. So if you just do little things every day to preserve that, um, then you're going to be in really good shape later on. Athleticism is going to matter a lot more to you than muscle long term. And athleticism you can define as the ability to take to put the brakes on. Athleticism is the ability to take massive loads under force and stop. That's what athleticism is. That's what goes with age. Um, and you see it with falls, you see it with muscle pulls, like all kinds of it. It's just see it. So preserving athleticism is very easy to do. Takes almost no time, and if you just kind of make that part of your foundation every day of your life, then as you age, you're just going to be really young because it's the athleticism that goes. You can put on a bunch of muscle and have an old body with no athleticism. So that's a big deal. And then balance really is the key. In that we're in these to me, mind-boggling thought distortions of this age. It just blows my mind that, when you're dealing with complex machinery, complex systems, um, usually everything has an optimal dosing or an optimal level of something, such that anything can offset the balance of the machinery in the system, you know? It's only when you're talking about substance that you can talk in blacks and whites. Like, when you talk about substance, you're like, "Is this pure or is it not pure?" Okay, well, then that makes sense, but we're talking about complex machinery like the body. Balance is really, or homeostasis is really the highest truth of the thing, and so
Yeah, I
everything.
mean, water can kill you in
Right,
excess or in absence, right? Or and
yeah.
it's just normal day to day, right? So
Yeah, so curves matter. Everything works on a curve. Everything works, relative to time, and nothing is static. Nothing works the same way over time, and so that's missing. That's mind-boggling to me. Like, the Biggest Loser guy, he discovered the hard way that just getting your weight to one level isn't gonna s that's not the answer, because there's a whole template of things that happen after that that we could go into. They're biological in nature, but what that guy found out the hard way was he didn't solve the problem, he just made it worse. And so
Mhm.
we're never given this map. You're never given the map that you're actually gonna have to travel. And so suffice to say that, um, homeostasis and balance is really important. It's important in diet, it's important in the way you exercise, it's important in the way you supplement. And you'll just find, like, a good example is, I'm Mr. Anti-daily. I don't think you should be taking really almost anything daily. Maybe minerals. Maybe minerals make sense daily, but I don't think you should eat the same foods every day. I don't think you take the same supplements every day. I don't think you should do the same exercises every day. And that's how things are in nature. In nature, you're going to have diversity forced on you, and it's a good idea to apply that to life.
Yeah, keep your system guessing and anti-fragile, right? Able to kind of roll with the punches of life and the changes that keep coming and a big picture. I mean, anecdotally, I would say that's very true. The patients that I have with the most rigid diets that eat the exact same thing every single day have not great outcomes in terms of some of the downstream effects over time, right? You're not gonna I don't see that immediately in these patients, but if they've kind of been on this rigid anything actually for a very long period of time, with their health, they're seen to be deleterious outcomes downstream when there isn't that variation kind of built in. So I love that anti-daily guy. I'm gonna tuck that one away. Are you the same with your supplements? Are you taking breaks from them even when you're kind of measuring what supplements you need and those sorts of things?
Yeah, I cycle just about everything in and out, just depending on how I need it. I do have a foundational stack of things I do, but I don't do that every day. I rotate in different things in that foundational stack, and then even then, I'll change the dosing at different times of the year. So I might go to, once or twice a week, and then different parts of the year, I might go like 3 times a week, but on alternate days. So I'm just never doing it's there's always some variance in it, you know?
Yeah, rad. There's a couple things you touched on that I want to dive deeper in. One being the oxygenation and circulation, maybe a little bit later in the conversation, but I'm super fascinated by like the nitric oxide producing pathways and some of the ways this affects heart health and some of these other things. It's a topic that comes up a lot with our patients and they're very health literate, so they'll be excited, I think, to hear about that. But I want to start with kind of this little overall theme of like balance, like you mentioned, and how does this play into nutrition specifically and how this affects the microbiome? I know as an area you talked about a lot, but like, what are your thoughts on some of these dogmas? Vegan versus carnivore versus paleo versus whatever, right? Fill in the blank. Like, how do you address that kind of, how these kind of combat each other, and what would you say the ideal way of looking at this is?
First thing to understand is that all of those are saying the same thing. They're saying the exact same thing. They have the exact same sentence, okay? The way to health is to avoid, quote, "the bad foods." Now you gotta insert the bad foods. So if you're a vegan, it's all the meats, okay? If you're a carnivore, it's all the plants, okay? The way to health is to, quote, "avoid the bad foods and then eat the good foods." Okay? They're just swapping the term. They're just swapping the
Hmm.
foods, but they're saying the exact same thing. And what they're really ultimately saying is that the way to health is an imbalanced diet. And let's destroy that from one mechanistic perspective, which is just insulin. Okay. Pretty tough to have real and lasting health if insulin is not optimal. Okay. Like we can just about guarantee you're going to have some issue if insulin isn't really,
Agreed.
if you're not insulin sensitive. Okay. So we can literally prove within just 2 minutes that either side is completely stupid and missing the point. And it's easy. So when you look at insulin, you find that in order for insulin to work optimally, it isn't one thing you need working correctly. You need an entire inventory. You need an entire family or suite of hormones working correctly. So they all have to work together and they all need stimulation. So that's adiponectin, that's GIP, GLP-1, insulin, glucagon, all those hormones. And then all those hormones have to work on a foundation where they interact with the microbiome. So the microbiome needs to be optimal for insulin to work optimally. And then all those hormones need work. Now, if you go and look at just dietarily speaking, let's say, how do you stimulate insulin versus glucagon? You're going to find the foods are actually opposed to each other to do that optimally. So you're going to really get a lot of glucagon stimulation from your carnivore keto diets. You're going to get that. Okay. And then you're going to get a lot of insulin stimulation from sort of your vegan diets. What you find is that if for insulin to really work optimally, I kind of need both actually, but I need them at different times. I don't need them at the same time. That's a huge point if you think about that. So in other words, I need, and I'm really reducing this down just to 2 hormones here, glucagon and insulin. I need those working optimally, but they're like the pedals on a bike. They kind of need to work together, but they need to work at different times. So glucagon, you kind of can look at that as as a starvation hormone in a sense. You can kind of look at that, typically, when you're in ketosis or when you're fasting, you get some glucagon stimulation. So you want some, but you don't want too much. You can get glucagon resistance, just like insulin resistance. Okay. And then with insulin, you definitely want that, like this whole generation of people that had been doing the carnivore diet now have moved to the sugar diet and they're finding out, oh my gosh, hey, wow, I'm getting insulin sensitive. How strange. That's because insulin needs to be stimulated and it needs insulin sensitizing foods. So things like legumes, things like certain types of grains, things like polyphenols, they all make insulin more sensitive. And so you can just readily prove this and see that opposing food groups stimulate opposing hormones to bring the symphony together where insulin works together optimally. Okay. We haven't even gotten the adiponectin in talking about this or, GIP, GLP-1 and all that. But the really fantastic thing is if you break this argument down, so number one, you readily see that these opposing food tribes each has 50% of the equation. Like we kind of need your foods, but you need my foods for things to work correctly. And more importantly, that's exactly what happens in nature. So if you took someone, dropped them in nature, dropped them on Alone or Naked and Afraid and watched what they did, they would exactly stimulate those hormones in the optimal way. So you'd be starving for a while, you're getting all this glucagon stimulation, then you kill a rabbit or a deer or whatever, and then you're just getting, you know, um, and then meanwhile you're foraging, and so you're getting insulin directly from just foraging from roots, berries, things like that. And so nature provides this perfect balance where you don't get too much of anything. And so what all of these camps have missed is that the body is homeostatic in its nature and that the strengths of one food category offset the weaknesses and liabilities of another. That's the truth. So, for example, you can readily prove this. I did a debate with Sean Baker when we went down this road. Um, if you look at meat
For the
consumption,
listeners that don't know, Sean Baker's very pro carnivore diet
yeah,
is kind of his shtick.
yeah. If you look at meat consumption, and by the way, these tribes are religious in nature. I mean, this is like,
Yeah,
like
tribal I think is a good word for it.
yeah, and it's a religious fervor. And the funny thing is, people swap tribes every few years. I just okay, well, I was in the vegan tribe, now I'm in the meat tribe. But what you find is that you can get too much of anything. So, for example, if you're just eating nothing but meat, you're going to potentiate fusobacteria in the gut. You're advantaging fusobacteria because that's what it eats. Okay, it loves to ferment proteins, and you're going to get some amino acid leakage into the colon a little bit every day. So that ferments fusobacteria. So fusobacteria is a cancer promoter. It's a
Right.
lot of other things. You don't want that. Super simple to offset. You just need some fibers. So fibers together with meat, you get all the benefits, but you don't get the liabilities. And that's one example. There's dozens. We could extend this argument to the cardiovascular system, and it's even stronger. So when you begin to look at the cardiovascular system and you look at what are the problems you're going to run into with age, you're seeing a couple conspicuous characters. Number one is the decline of the glycocalyx. That's a massive problem. No one ever talks about it. Then you're seeing the essentially destruction of the endothelium mediated through the NADPH or the NOx enzymes that begin to overexpress with age. And these problems work together. They work together
Hmm.
to accelerate the decline of the vasculature.
So
So
you're
we
just getting
begin to,
these free radicals and oxidative stress bouncing around.
yes, yeah, you're getting, so the NADPH oxidases, these are the only free radical producing enzymes in the body. So you get this excess of hydrogen peroxide, which normally you need to mediate insulin function. So the NOx enzymes, they're a check or a feedback loop in glucose transport, and so you make hydrogen peroxide, and it sort of throttles or puts the brakes on things. But when they begin to overexpress, then that's a big problem because you're getting the endothelium itself becomes chronically inflamed, and then you got big problems. Along with that, you see the collapse of the glycocalyx, which is kind of this hairy membrane for the listeners here. It's this hairy membrane that lines the the inner lining of the vasculature, and it's a mechanical tension sensor. So it helps the junctions of the vasculature to kind of stay where they need to be, sort of optimally. As the glycocalyx declines, those junctions, you get leaky vessels essentially, and then that leads to cardiovascular disease, all kinds of problems. So when you begin to reverse engineer, well, how can we fix this? And you begin to look at like, well, what is preventative of this? And then you start to see variety pop up. It's like, well, let's see. We need absolutely got to have berries in the diet because those inhibit overexpression of the NOx enzymes. We need leafy greens because as we age, there's a decline not only in nitric oxide production, there's a decline in nitric oxide bioavailability. So the leafy greens feed the nitrate producing bacteria in the mouth, and then combined with things like berries and other foods, you increase nitric oxide bioavailability. Okay. So you begin to make a really good case that variety and diversity in the diet begins to mitigate structure function problems that we run into with age. And I can make the same case for animal foods and the whole route that those things are protective too. And then they work together. They're very synergistic. So yeah, sorry.
Well,
Going off on
question that I think no, this is great. This is gold. But I think the listeners will have some questions because some things popped into my mind. So when
mm,
you say they need to be together, like I want to be crystal clear. Do you mean at the same time
yeah,
in the same meal? Do you mean in the same week? Like what's
mm,
ideal for, you said fiber offsets the downsides of meat. And then I'm guessing, I'm extrapolating with when you're supporting these nitric oxide pathways and with the berries and the leafy greens and how the Knox plays in, I'm guessing these are going to offset some of the quote unquote deleterious effects of saturated fats, right? Because you're worried about like oxidative, saturated fats in the vessels at that point. So we're seeing this like theory of balance coming into play and how these foods can kind of offset one another and you get maybe the benefits of both and less risk of both, right? But how does that what does that look like in real time? Are people having berries one day and meat the
um,
next? Or like what
mm,
is it best for your microbiome if you're doing them in the same meal? I just want to get like crystal clear for people and if there is an answer.
yeah, I think there is. So I'll just come forward and say, yeah, I have a bias on this. I got a dog in this fight. I've written a book on this, and I think there's an optimal way to do it. But let's forget that. Let's forget my little magic potion there, and just talk generally speaking. I think just generally speaking, not counting the what, the when, and the how, just the fact that there is diversity and balance in the diet. So these things are rounded out. There's three sets of benefits that I can see top of my head. Number one is that you don't get too much of anything. Okay. And you hit on such a great point there with saturated fat. So going back to this really stupid polarization of thought, like we went through an era where saturated fats were only bad. And now we've come into this era where saturated fats are only good. There are people that advocate saturated fats are only good. They're not bad. We were wrong. Now we know they're good. And neither position's true. The truth is that there's a U-shaped curve there, and there's a
Yeah.
dose relationship to
Like with
saturated fats.
everything.
Yeah, and that dose
People like
also,
answers though, right? People
yeah,
it feels good. It feels good to have answers.
it does, and let's just say that there are the better our answers get, the more variables we include, and maybe there's a cutoff point where it's too complex, but we can add one or two. Like one is well, how old are you? How far down the timeline are you? Because like saturated fats are maybe not a big deal on a 25-year-old. It could be a gigantic deal on a 55-year-old. Okay. That, and then what's the dose? Like, what are we talking here? Are you eating massive, you're on a carnivore diet, you're eating just saturated fats till cows come home, no pun intended. Um, that maybe not such a good thing if you're 55, for example. So all that to say, yeah, you can get too much of anything. You can get too much of anything. And yeah, you can get too much saturated fat. It blows my mind that there are people out there advocating this now, like, "Oh, no, you can't. No, it's only good. It's only good." But that's a benefit of, diversity in the diet is it mitigates you getting too much of anything. Okay, we haven't gone to
Mhm.
what, when, and how yet. Another benefit is just synergies. So, there are very real synergies. One of the most interesting has to do with longevity. So, there there have been studies looking at different aspects of longevity, and, one of those is muscle. And there've been studies that showed, well, if you just added a certain amount of grains into the diet, you actually gain more muscle than if you didn't have those in the diet. And you can begin to look at, synergies between different foods where the strengths of one food can offset another. So that's another way that they work together. Another way that they all work together ultimately too is in terms of the microbiome. When you have diversity in the diet, you feed the gut optimally. So the gut needs both. It needs aminos. You need aminos to feed the small gut. And then you need fibers and phenols and starches to feed the colon, the large intestine. They need both. You just that's just how it's wired. So
Yeah.
that's before we get to what, when, and how. And then what I would offer is that if you really want to tweak this, the goal is to mimic nature. So in nature, you're gonna have periods where there's abundance. I get to eat, tons of energy dense foods, meat stuff primarily. And then you're gonna have periods where you don't get any of that stuff. And then you're eating lesser preference foods. You're eating roots, you're eating, berries, you're eating leaves, things like that. And it's to try to have both, but never at the same time, because that's kind of how nature works. And so that's kind of how I do it. I'll have one day a week where it's more foraging, lower in protein, higher in fiber, higher in starch, and I stack the starches and the fibers. So the berries and the sugary stuff's in the morning, the starchy stuff's in the afternoon, and the leafy stuff is at evening. So that one day sort of balances everything out. It's all in there. It's just when I'm taking it in. And from a immunity perspective, it's kind of optimal because what you're doing is you're tuning the microbiome and you're driving the bacteria that drive immunity. And then the following day, I go into a really short fast that's been amplified by those bacteria. Those bacteria mimic fasting in a lot of ways. And then I'll eat kind of rather keto carnivore ish, and I'll be higher in protein. And that's kind of how I do it.
Yeah. It was some interview I heard you on. It might have been Greenfield's podcast where you kind of touched on this pretty directly. I think calling it, your foraging day, your fasting day, your feasting day. I think people will relate to that. I had questions I remember when I listened to that thinking like, how does this apply to like a busy mom or a family that's looking for other people or like an athlete that can't fast as much because they're super active that day or just extrapolating it to different clinical or real life scenarios that we see regularly with our patients or ourselves, right? And I imagine the answer is just going to be context, right? Like it's going to be a little different for everybody in terms of the what, the when, the how, like you're saying. um are there super, I mean, would you say that's accurate? Like, are you just deviating, kind of trying to follow this ancestral pattern, that finds that balance, but, shifting for these different times in life, right, that everyone goes through?
Yeah, that's sort of ideal. I mean, real life, like nature doesn't give you this set schedule, and oh yeah, it's Tuesday. Hey, we're gonna find a water buffalo today. Yay. So yeah, I mean, I think that's actually all good. The variety and the variance and all
Like
of
that
that.
built-in
That's
variety.
yeah.
Yeah. Cool. You also reminded me, I don't know if you've read the book The Switch by James Clement. Are you familiar with that book? He talks a lot about like this balance of anabolic and catabolic processes and kind of leveraging the mTOR pathway. So having these periods of upregulating, intake and downregulating intake, you're reminding me of that a lot. This just pattern of balance when it comes to longevity, right? You don't want anything turned on for too long, right? You do want to find that homeostasis in the body. So that's super fascinating. Um, would you say there are, any super big like patterns that you're seeing or kind of pearls in this, or is it really just contextually for everybody if you had to give some pieces of advice? Because I think the tough thing about saying not everything's contextual, but the tough thing about adding the nuance and the context is people aren't sure what to do when they apply it to their life, right? So would you have pieces of advice of just someone listening, what do they do with this information? Do they find a practitioner they trust? Do they read your book? And it's okay, you have a dog in the fight, it's great. Or, do they just relate this to their daily life and listen to their body? Would you have any real life pearls for people of how they actually apply these principles?
Yeah, so I think that there needs to be a foundation. There always has to be a foundation. And then, you're gonna deviate from that based on real life. But what I would offer foundationally is that in a given week, so something I talk about in my book is circaseptan rhythm or 7-day rhythm. And it's not hard to see that different days of the week actually have unique nutritional sort of requirements. It's very easy to see, like, do you eat the same on Monday that you do on Sunday, or do you eat the same on Wednesday that you do on Saturday? You really don't. And and this has actually been proven too. There are circaseptan rhythms or 7-day rhythms where, like Saturday is kind of your best day to catch up on sleep. And, so as a foundation goes, the first thing is to sort of align with the natural daily and weekly rhythms. And then in that bucket, there's a few simple ideas. One is that Sunday is a day that you set the week up with. And an easy way to do that is that the first part of the day is feasting, and then the second part of the day is lighter in food. You're not fasting, it's just lighter. So it's foods that are lighter. But what that does is by setting the week up like that, so if you did it the way I do it, you would think, my gosh, this is insane. Breakfast will be huge. There'll be another big meal, and it's very satiating, like a grilled cheese. And then lunch might be like a big bowl of soup. And so the whole goal is that you're crushing the hormonal domain of satiety and fullness, and trying to create that feeling of being sick of food. If you ever done that, if you've ever just eaten something, you're like, I don't want to eat ever again.
Pretty
Sick.
much every Thanksgiving,
Yeah.
Joel.
Okay. Yeah. So you're trying to do that kind of the first half of the day on Sunday. And by doing that also, it sets you up to sleep really good Monday night going into a stressful day. And they're just eating light. You're eating a very light dinner. That's I'll even do like a shake at dinner on Sundays if I overeat during the day. And that sets the week up. So what that's doing is two things. Number one, it is making it much easier to eat stricter during the week if you want to do that. Very often people try to eat strict during the week and they've got so much pressure that they just blow it. They'll come home and just medicate on carbs and wine and stuff. And part of it is you just didn't set the week up. So setting the week up on Sunday is a huge deal. And it's literally volume of food. So big volume of food in the morning and satiating food. So I'll do like pancakes and, steak and eggs and grilled cheese and soup, like super satiating foods. So it sets you up to sleep, sets you up to eat strict during the week. And then during the week, I'm just trying to sandwich in 3 foraging days and 3 feasting days with a really short fast. And so Monday is a foraging day. Um, and by foraging, I just mean what you think of as foraging foods. I just mean things like, berries, nuts, resistant starch, roots, leafy greens, things like that. Looks kind of vegan, but you can add protein as you will. I tend not to. So I tend to be very low on protein on that day. And the reason is that it's a great fat loss tool. So when you take protein very low, um, you're not stimulating mTOR as much, but more than that, you're getting cysteine and methionine depletion. And so helps you to stay lean over time. And then the next thing is the next day is just a really short fast amplified by small molecules like berberine, NAC glycine. Very short, like 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, you're done. And then huge meal, gigantic meal, but feasting foods. So like I'll have I'll do steak, I'll do hamburger, I'll do, looks kind of carnivore. Um, and that's kind of that pattern. And so by that pattern, I have days where I'm getting tons of protein in and I can time workouts to that if I want to do that. But you're taking the entire picture into account. So you're taking in the microbiome, you're taking into account cancer prevention, immunity, um, muscle growth, all of it. We're taking everything into account by doing that. And so I would say, as a foundation goes, trying to stick to that over a lifetime will serve you very well. And because there's room for lots of things you can insert. For example, on Fridays, I'll insert a pattern that's specific to Fridays. And so I'll change up the foods in the morning. I'll go with more pineapple, more kiwi, things for the gut, things for digestion. And then I will leave a lot of calories open for dinner, because if we go out, want to have a glass of wine, whatever, then fine. And so it's just understanding the 7-day cycle. That would be the key thing, understanding the seven and how to work each day of that cycle. And it's not that hard once you get it. It's Friday night has unique considerations, Saturday does, Sunday does, and then kind of those foraging days during the week. And that's the gist of it.
I love it. I hear you weaving in, different exercise tendencies, circadian rhythms, and I imagine that you can adjust these things. For women, it may be for time of the month or time of their life in terms of hormones. It may be a super stressful time. It may be a super active time for some of our athletes. So I imagine that you can kind of tailor this plan to different individual needs. But I like looking at that bite size of your life through the lens of a week, and how are you setting those things up to give your body what it needs and keep that variety going. That's awesome. I have a question for you. This is a bit selfish because we test genetics at Wild Health. Um, and I'm curious what your experience has been or what your thoughts are on, different tendencies of populations for individualizing these things further, right? Like whether that's based on, evolutionarily based on geography, based on genetics. I imagine there's tendencies of groups of people. I'm a little biased because I look at genetics, right? But I'm just curious what your experience has been with this, or are you just looking at humans as a species and this is what you see just in general?
It's a really good question. Here's how my take on this is that there are generalizable things that are foundational, and they're true of everybody, and they're simple, and they're simple and easy to fix, and most people aren't even doing them. And so, like, example, just, correcting vitamin D issues, correcting microbiome issues, correcting like apnea issues during sleep. Those are just like universal, simple, basic, easy to do things that make colossal difference long term. And so those are things that, everybody should do, but they don't. And just as a foundation, let's do all this stuff first. But then there's that last 20%, and that's just medicine. That's the province of medicine to come in and do genomic testing and, look at SNPs and look at all that stuff and really tailor things down. I think particularly in the influencer space, there are too many people getting out of their lane, trying to do medicine, trying to trying to they're just, it's like, nah, this is stuff a doctor should be doing. You need to be giving testing and all this stuff. And I think there's a massive, so what you run into is that there's the generalizable stuff that fixes a lot of stuff. But then there are specific issues that cannot be solved outside of, like, a practitioner and testing and medicine. And that's where it takes someone to come in and, do testing and look at SNPs and go, you're really low here in homocysteine, or you're low there, and we need this and we need that. And
Hmm.
so I just look at it kind of like foundational stuff, do the stuff that's common to everybody. And then if there are leftover issues, you got to find a good practitioner to work
Yeah,
with.
it's kind of a both and conversation.
Yeah.
I use a oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna quick thing. An example of that to me is probiotics. So so you see this shotgun approach with probiotics. Everybody should take probiotics. Everybody should take them. And I think it's doing more harm than good long term. And I think it's just me, but I think that's probably the province of medicine. It's probably the province of physicians, to do it selectively and strategically, and just go, wow, you've got an issue with, this particular thing. You need this particular strain of bacteria. Let's just do it for this amount of time. So it's done very intelligently. And I think done that way, probiotics can be incredible. But I think the way that they're being done, just this shotgun thing, on the marketplace, I think in a lot of cases it's probably doing more harm than good. So
I mean, gosh, this is an area I wanted to actually ask you about in some of the like quicker questions we go through because I would say even y- I have functional medicine training. I'm a precision medicine practitioner and I'm just like overwhelmed by the data with probiotics. I tend to not use them even in targeted ways and go more towards the prebiotics and the lifestyle and et cetera. Because I am nervous about that. Can they do more harm than good? Or are they even working at all and getting to where they need to go? Right. Um, I think the evidence is so mixed and honestly, it doesn't seem like it's really like borne out yet. So, we can go there now if you'd like to. I'm just personally curious with all your work in the microbiome, like, do you recommend microbiome testing? Or are there clinical scenarios where you think probiotics in kind of a targeted way are a really good idea? I know sometimes they can go out of whack, like Epimanthy has gotten a big buzz lately, right?
yeah.
So I'm just curious what your general take is on this, just having so much experience in the field.
Um, so I think again, there's a general and there's condition, sense. So I think generalizing things like, helping with fat loss and helping with bowel movements, and I think that the first thing I would offer is that the microbiome is so rapidly recolonizable through food that I would say do that first. And then if there is a particular area of probiotics that you can get through food, why would you do the probiotic? Like if you can stimulate Akkermansia through food, why would you use a probiotic? To me, that's stupid. Um,
And
but then,
expensive.
yeah, yeah, and potentially more problems than it solves long term. I mean, there isn't you know, we don't have 20 years of testing on Akkermansia supplementation in humans to know like, well, what is this engineered strain gonna do? I mean, this is not native to the human gut, what we're making, it's slightly different. So I don't so on that front, I would say that, you know, the food is the most powerful thing we have, and I'm only saying that because I've seen it in my own life and other people's lives. I've seen mind-boggling things. Our Dr. Phil episode that we did, we had a girl, she was on 22 meds. She was like 300 and something pounds, and she had 5 years to live, her doctor gave her, and which is just through food, nothing else. In 3 months, perfect blood work, off all meds, just through food. So food is really underrated in terms of its power. Um, that being said, I think that there's a bright future for the selective administration of different strains of things, and I can tell you what I've seen. Constipation, propionic bacteria, Freudenreich, like boom every time, no problem. Um, and the younger strains of Bifido can work wonders done selectively. Your Bifidum infantis, those strains,
And I'm
just
guessing these aren't like a forevermore thing for you when
like 2
you
weeks, 3
I
weeks.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, 'cause you don't even take your vitamin D every day. You're the non-daily guy, right?
Right.
So
Yeah, no, it's true, yeah. Yeah, so I think there's a really bright future for probiotics. It's not even here yet. I think we're in the peptide phase, but I think the probiotic phase is coming where practitioners will be able to use different strains for, different things. I mean, and I've got a list, I've been tracking for different strains for different things. Mind-boggling. I mean, it's like, eczema, no problem, this strain, autism, these 2 strains. And I think that, it's very much to me like where functional medicine is now with stem cells and, exosomes, where you have it's very the bleeding edge is in the practitioner office. That's way beyond the studies. There are practitioners I know that are doing stuff that just blows my mind, and
Mhm.
they're just the only ones doing it or part of a select little club. And I think that's where the frontier is. And I think probiotics has that kind of a future where practitioners can really dive into strain specific outcomes and begin to administer them for targeted periods for very, medicine essentially. And I think that's really got a bright future.
Yeah, I think there's gonna be massive amounts of data coming. I think what's curious to me about it is, like you said, it's so quick in how it evolves, right? So how do we assess that and treat a moving target that's so ever changing, right? And maybe the answer is just really like short bursts of therapy, like what you're talking about, right? I mean, I know people that just take a probiotic every single day, no matter what. This was kind of this generic probiotic. So anyway, super awesome. Thanks for going through that. I want to touch on a few subjects that I've heard you speak on, and like doesn't have to be like rapid fire, but I just think there's subjects that our listeners will be super interested in. And then also I want to ask, this is more selfish for me, but I want to ask a little bit about your supplement as well. That has lactoferrin in it. I don't know if you just released this or what the status on it is, but, let's start there if you don't mind. Like, I'd be curious your take on this. I know colostrum, bovine colostrum mother has gotten a lot of, buzz in the last few years, and I have some patients that anecdotally have said they've had great experiences with it. Colostrum contains lactoferrin, right? And then, as well as immunoglobulins and other things. I personally, anecdotally, am a big proponent of human colostrum. I saw it work wonders with my son. I nursed my son, and he had, a life-threatening gut issue when he was a newborn, required surgery and antibiotics, and all this stuff I didn't want going on with his gut. And I was told he may not ever eat normally and all this stuff. And he's like the fattest, happiest, most normal little kid, right? And it was like really important to me to feed him fresh breast milk, even in the NICU when it means you have no sleep and all these things. But I think there's a lot of like healing properties to it. So I just want to ask you about what you created, who you like to who you see benefit from it, what you might see as that in comparison to something like bovine colostrum that people are taking. So if you wouldn't mind addressing it.
Yeah, lactoferrin's been on my radar for years. There wasn't so the only way to get it up until this year really was bovine lactoferrin, which is great stuff. I mean, it's effective. With the advent of precision fermentation, we can now do human lactoferrin, and that stuff's amazing. I mean, there's very few things that I think supplementally are just like, wow, okay, that works. And I mean, lactoferrin's one of them. Um, so if we start at the beginning and you just look at mother's milk, human mother's milk, it's essentially it's essentially growth serum, it's immune serum, I mean, it's everything that the infant needs to jumpstart health. That's what's in there. And so that's a track I've been on for a very long time with the human milk oligosaccharides and, going down this road of if you want to replicate the young gut, you need to kind of replicate mother's milk as much as you can. And it's proved to be very, very, very effective with just one component, which is the human milk oligosaccharides. When you look at the pleiotropic effects of lactoferrin, I mean, it, it's pretty compelling stuff. It really is. So lactoferrin, um, it seems to act as essentially an intelligent mediator of the immune system. And that's not my language. That's language taken from studies where they're anthropomorphizing lactoferrin in that way. Okay. They're saying, yeah, it just seems to know. It seems to really mediate immune balance. And so when you have, an overactive immune system, it seems to calm it down. When you have a weak immune system, it seems to strengthen it. But then apart from that, its pleiotropic effects are just, I mean, it would take this whole podcast to keep going over them. I mean, lactoferrin, it can bind to low density lipoproteins. It helps to repair the endothelium. I mean, it just does on and on and on, all the benefits of lactoferrin. So I think personally, the way that I approach this whole thing in life is that there's a foundation that you need, call it nutrient insurance. And there are certain things that make a good case to be in there to take the slope. So we have the likelihood of not getting a good outcome as you age, and we want to decrease the percentage or the likelihood or the probability of that slope. And so lactoferrin just makes a very, very good case that it probably should be in the picture, not just for its iron binding properties, but for its across the board effects on human health. And personally, I mean, just since we launched this product, I've seen it. I mean, I'm just getting testimonial after some feedback from people who, particularly aged populations that are like, wow, my energy is restored. How's this work? And people with autoimmune issues that like, that's the only thing that's helping me. And so, I don't want to oversell it, but I think the advent of the way the technology is now where we can do human lactoferrin, I think it's a big deal and it's only going to become a bigger deal. That's how I would put it.
Super cool. So, I mean, obviously, you can't get direct advice here, but it's your personal opinion. Is this something that you think most people would benefit from periodically, at least?
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, in fact,
Yeah,
I'll go so far as to say lactoferrin in some cases makes the case for daily. Like for certain
it's
populations,
a
it
big
makes it.
statement.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah,
Not for everybody. I mean, certainly, like, younger populations, no. I mean, may not need it at all, but, definitely with aged populations, just from the issue of iron balance alone, it becomes, kind of a very, very compelling proposition. So, and with precision fermentation, what's going on is we're gonna see more aspects of, mother's milk being brought to market. And so there's another protein I'm looking at, and it just, being able to replicate as closely as possible, all the beneficial aspects of mother's milk, I think
it's the
you
OG precision nutrition, right? I
it really
mean,
is, yeah.
day by day it changes for the needs. It's just magic. Very cool. And your supplement, Young Gut, is it called Young Gut, right? It's
Mhm,
currently
mhm.
like people are able to purchase this now.
Mhm. Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh,
Nice.
so Young Gut, the original version of Young Gut is lactoferrin and solanol resistant starch, and that has been available for, going back a year or 2 now. That stuff's amazing. I mean, that stuff just normalizes bowel movements, but then we added lactoferrin to it, and, yeah, it's pretty cool stuff.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, very cool. I originally started learning about this product of yours because I actually had a patient with a pretty resistant ankylosing spondylitis case that had pretty radical response to it. So, and this is a guy I believe pretty much everything he tells me. He's not one to complain. And all of this started for him. He started getting flares again after he had a little one, and he was getting just strep throat after strep throat after strep throat, right? Like kid was getting sick, and then he would get sick, so he'd have antibiotics, and he pretty
Mhm,
much just, demolished his microbiome balance is my
mhm.
theory. So he started getting these flares of AS again, and I think your supplement or it the lack of iron is my guess is what did it. Gave up pretty, yeah. I love it. I love it. Cool. Okay, a couple other subjects I want to ask you about. One is GLP-1s are super, obviously talked about right now. Obviously in the weight loss field, starting to become a lot more talked about in like neurocognitive health and neurodegenerative prevention, different things in terms of longevity space. I know you've done a lot of work in like you mentioned this earlier in our conversation, but you've done a lot of work in like preventing the rebound weight gain, and I know there's a lot of complex hormones involved in that. So if you wouldn't mind touching on your thoughts on GLPs, I know, you've done some talk like some writing and some interviews around kind of what foods can boost this and how to
Yeah.
naturally support your GLP pathways. So I would just be curious your thoughts on this general subject. I know probably any of these could be a whole podcast for you, but if you could bullet point it for us.
Yeah, having done weight loss for for large populations going back like 20 years, there are just some people that can't lose weight no matter what you throw at them. That's we used to do these huge, huge corporate engagements. Like we did one in the city of Phoenix. It was 3,000 people, and they brought them in at like 500 at a time into the city hall, and we just did this all day. And the first thing I would say is, hey, look, nothing works for everybody. There's no 100% solution. That's the truth, and that's the truth. So having run into that many times over the years, I would say that there's you can make a good case that there's some people who just need them because it's much more like there's benefits, there's risks, blah blah blah.
When you
But
say then, you mean the medications, not the foods that boost your natural pathways?
right, medications, yeah. So in
Got it.
terms of the medications, there's just there are people that they just cannot lose weight, and the risks long term, like if you ask me like to try and boil a body down to one thing, you can't. But if you did, I would say, well, it's adipose mass. This As your adipose mass gets broken and becomes dysfunctional, the whole ship sinks. So getting body fat under control is kind of like the top thing on the list. And there's some people that just can't lose weight. And so I think in that case, GLP-1s are an amazing tool. And yeah, so um, that being said, with some of the earlier generation drugs, I think there's a lot of concern about just the GI tract long term, and other things that will I don't think the data is there yet with very large populations. I know they've been around for many years, but when you start to bring in huge populations, that becomes really the trick. Which, a little side note, if I can just venture into this, I'll come back to the main topic, but it's it's this whole sort of I will get back to GLPs. I just got to say this. It's this whole sort of sycophantic worship of RCT studies over epidemiological studies. The thing that I think is generally not understood is that RCTs don't work very well on small populations. I mean, like the data you get, in other words, if the population is small, like, oh, we did a study, 20, 30 people, they only work very well on massive populations. That's where they work. That's where the confidence can be in RCTs. And so in that sense, RCTs are kind of big pharma science. Okay, because that's the only people that can afford to do population studies that big. Where when you look at epidemiological studies, there's been research done showing, like, comparing them to RCTs, and you can get into a place with epidemiological studies where you have two things. You have confluence of variables and you have conciliation together. And in that case, epidemiological studies are much better than RCTs in many cases. Like the data, the confidence you can have in the data is very, very strong. So anyways, I just had to say that. We touched
But
on.
everything in context, right? Because I know a lot of nutritional data is epidemiologic, and like certain nutritional studies, I just like gasp at that they're continually cited because I'm like, yeah, but that one was done in this way, and like, who can remember how many times they ate meat in the last year? And certain ways some of these studies are done. So what Joel's talking about, guys, is RCT is going to be a randomized control trial, which is seen in Western medicine, which is kind of the the evidence-based medicine, sees RCTs as kind of actually meta-analyses of RCTs, I would say would be kind of the gold standard, right? But RCTs are seen as very strong in general. And what he's pointing out is essentially like the person, how big that population is, right? Like it may not be that helpful, if it's not done in a large scale population, right?
Yeah, and it's just that there's actually been research done on epidemiological versus RCTs, and they're within a few percentage points of each other, so
Hmm.
anyways, all that to say it's a thing. But
Yeah.
okay, getting back to GLPs. So, yeah, so I think that long term with some of the earlier drugs, there's probably some issues I'd be concerned with. Yeah, I think they're getting better and better and better. So, um, I mean, it's I think the future's drugs. I hate to say it, I really don't want to say it, but I think that's the truth. That these drugs are getting so good that what can you say? They work.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. We use them in small doses for certain populations, when someone has an ApoE4 for, risk allele profile and very high risk for neurocognitive decline in the future as kind of proactive management in certain other clinical scenarios. These are pretty common things that come up in our patient population. And like you said, if someone has a high amount of adipose tissue or they have a high amount of fat mass, they're really going to struggle to get insulin sensitive. They're really going to struggle to get their inflammation down. It's really hard to shift that momentum, right? Even if they're doing all the things right. And I have a number of patients that have been in this clinical scenario, and I believe them that they're doing everything right. And it's very, very difficult, just I think hormonally to turn that momentum around. And then sometimes they'll get these drugs on board and it doesn't have to be a high dose, and sometimes it doesn't have to be for very long. They start to shift that momentum, and it's pretty radical.
Mhm.
So I think again, this could be a whole conversation, and there's context here as well, right? And nuance. Like they're not for everybody in certain age groups. I mean, I wouldn't even go down this pathway of conversation, but I think there's certain populations that it can make a lot of sense for.
Totally.
Um, Cool. I wanted to, before we wrap up, circle back to the saturated fat conversation. So this is in kind of the what you mentioned as one of the initial tenets. If you had to go back and give yourself advice, the first thing you brought up was oxygenation and circulation. Our vascular health is king when it comes to longevity, right? Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death for men and women everywhere, has been for decades. Cancer may pass it, but even then, vascular health is massively important for neurocognitive, decline. Vascular health is massively important. I mean, we've got to oxygenate and circulate our tissues, right, in our organs. So I'm curious, how some of this plays in real life, because you mentioned little by little, how do we support that? And I can
Mhm.
think of a lot of ways that we support that. We've touched on a few things in terms of nitric oxide production and support of some of these pathways, but I'd love to tease that out a little bit more. Also, how that interplay of the oxidative stress and the saturated fat comes into play, because I agree with you. I think saturated fat has been really like kind of the center of some of these dogmas, right? Eggs are terrible, now eggs are great, or eat no meat, eat all meat, saturated fat is fine. And the answer is somewhere in between, right? We look at people's genetics, and some people are very high risk for saturated fat leading to issues, and some people not so much. This science isn't perfect, but I do see it play out pretty accurately in their vascular studies. So I would just love for you to, that was a really roundabout, word vomit way to talk about this, but I'd love for you to dive into some of that, especially the pathways on the oxidative stress in vascular health, and what can you actually do in real time to support these pathways as you age.
Mhm. Number one thing is your diet, long term, I think, because I just I'm a math guy. I just look at math. I just look at inputs, and when you look at the sum total of inputs that you're going to get in your lifetime, like every time you eat, that's an input. It's good or bad. Versus every time you exercise, you're going to eat way more than you exercise. So the math for food is much bigger. Like you're going to have way more inputs over the course of your life than you are exercise inputs. So diet is number one. It's your foundation, and that's why balance in the diet is so critical, because it's only by the inventory of, a global inventory of foods that you mitigate all the different aspects of vascular decline. So you need leafy greens in the diet for nitric oxide. You need, phenols and berry fruits in the diet for the NOx enzymes. Um, you need the right kind of microbiome fed through dairy, through starches to create iron bacteria with iron binding cytophores in the gut, so that you don't have these issues with iron overload as you get old. So diet is just kind of the foundational thing. Um, and then the next layer on that is VO2 max and small bursts across your day of VO2 max challenges. And so, well, I mean, I just did this morning. I only did two. I did two flights up this. There's these stairs near where I live, and I think it's like 117 steps, and it's quite a go. So I was very short on time. I just did a quick two, and that's like perfect. Okay, and I'll probably go do another set today. So what I'm just doing is throughout the day I'm having these small pulses of pushing VO2 max. So that, because it's the throughput ability of the vasculature to deliver oxygen to tissues that ultimately is going to decide a lot in terms of how you age and disease onset. And so keeping that throttled and keeping your VO2 max efficient is going to be very, very important long term. And you can do it in small bursts. I mean, there's a lot of different ways to create sort of a VO2 max challenge. It doesn't have to be time intensive or hard. I have a little device that I use. It's nothing. It's just these. It's a friend of mine made this device called the Synapse, and I could just go get on that thing for a minute and I'm gassed. I mean, it's ridiculous how that thing challenges you. Uh, so foundationally, instituting in your life the things that don't go away, like during seasons of like, okay, I'm really busy this year. We're being audited, whatever. You can always do these little pulses of VO2 max during the day. And so having two, three, four of those during the day, that is going to be foundational long term, very foundational. And then as we begin to age and the structure of the jaw begins to shift and collapse and the airway collapses, you know, probably the number one thing is really dealing with that, because what happens is at the back of the throat is the tissues. And so what happens is the facial structure collapses, but at the same time, the tissue grows. So it's a two-pronged attack on your airway flow. And so as the tissue at the back of the throat begins to grow with age, and then the face collapses, your throughput, your oxygenation is just that much less. And so you got to get on that. That's like, that can kill you. I mean, literally, just it starts as a snoring problem, then it progresses to apnea, and then next thing you know, you got all kinds of problems. So uh, that is a conditional problem with age, but it's like at the top of the list of things to fix, and there's a lot of ways to fix it now. There's jaw appliances, there's lasers, there's all kinds of things. Um, and along with that, some intelligent supplementation I think can help. So I do an inventory of things. I do, berry phenols, and that combined with NAC glycine. And so those things are very good for the vasculature. The issue we get into with age really is so the vasculature needs to dilate. Okay. It needs to open up, and that's mediated by nitric oxide, which is a free radical. And so in that sense, it's extremely beneficial. The problem we get into with age is that we begin to overproduce oxidative milieu in there. So you begin to overproduce nitric oxide, and it's primarily due to the decline of that class of enzymes, the NOx enzymes. And so as they begin to oversubscribe and just output too much hydrogen peroxide, too much free radicals, then you get an issue where nitric oxide can mediate what's called the Fenton reaction, and you can get a type of radical form called the hydroxyl radical, and we do a lot of damage to the endothelium, a lot of damage. And so that becomes an age-specific problem, and it's something everybody's going to face. Everyone will face that, and a lot of things impact that. So in that context, when you're looking at sort of an aged vasculature where there's these enzymes are oversubscribed, and the glycocalyx is damaged, the presence of saturated fats in that environment can be very detrimental. It can mediate oxidation, and so you can get kind of derivatives of saturated fats that are not so good. You can get things that really do a lot of damage. And so that becomes a thing. That becomes a real thing that we need to begin to mitigate with age. And diet, again, to me, is the principal way to go with that. But there's a lot of different ways to skin that cat. So kind of rambling, but
No, that's super helpful. And tell me if I'm understanding this correctly. Are you describing nitric oxide in the case of this Fenton reaction that it can actually potentiate the oxidative stress rather than help mitigate it?
yeah. So nitric oxide. So
I know we're getting in the weeds here, but I'm very curious about what you just said.
yeah. So nitric oxide normally is dismutated by superoxide, but that's an enzymatic reaction that requires an enzyme. So nitric oxide can interact with peroxynitrite, which doesn't require an enzyme, so it can outcompete the body's reductive mechanisms to produce free radicals that down the chain can become more damaging. So you can get nitrosative stress, you can get oxidative stress, and so the downstream of that is in the context of a damaged endothelium that nitric oxide um, can do harm. It can do a lot of harm. In fact, when I first started on this train about 20 years ago, I was dead set against nitric oxide because of the formation of peroxynitrate and then the downstream production of hydroxyl radicals and nitrosative radicals and all that. And I was like, wow, I mean, too much of this can kill you. Wow, this is really serious stuff. And then over time, came to be seen that nitric oxide generally was more beneficial than detrimental, and so all that to say, with age, we lose nitric oxide production, but we also lose nitric oxide bioavailability. But we also have competition for nitric oxide because there's so much oxidative stress going on that the path that nitric oxide goes down can go down a path that is harmful. And so all that to say, keeping the vasculature healthy is the thing that mitigates all this.
So again, back to looking some moderation, right? Like keeping the body's ability to, maintain bioavailability of nitric oxide and supporting the bacteria that produce this and feeding the bacteria that are involved in this is probably a better solution than taking it, maybe, because the body's going to naturally calibrate these nitric oxide levels to what you need. Is that a fair assessment?
I would offer that. So I would offer that we can stimulate nitric oxide in a couple different ways. There's kind of the generalized way through diet, but then there's sort of the acute way through supplementation, and that's fine. That requires a what, when, how understanding of when you're going to do it. So typically that's around a couple different areas. One, it's around workouts, understanding when to time it. So like some citrulline at the end of a workout is really good. You want to stimulate nitric oxide, open everything up, get your inflammatory signaling up through the roof post workout. Um, and I think also around bedtime, it can be kind of beneficial as well. It's just a question of when. And then the other piece of it though is just to not overdo it. Like me personally, so I got a Cipro injury about 10 years ago from taking Cipro, and my feet and Achilles can get inflamed really quick. And the thing that does it is if I take like energy drinks that have, citrulline and arginine and all that in there, I get so inflamed that it won't go away. And
So interesting.
I have to go to a different level and, do an ice bath and, do some other goodies to get the inflammation down. And so that's all mediated by excess nitric oxide production. So you can overdo it like through, pre-workout drinks and things like that. But I think there's intelligent ways to do it, which is diet and strategic supplementation. So yeah,
Yeah, fascinating. I recently interviewed Dr.
amazing.
Nathan Bryan
Yeah.
about this
Yeah.
and learned a lot. And learned a lot about how to best support the mouth microbiome or the oral microbiome and best ways to support this. But I like this pattern that keeps creeping up of personalizing things, which we're all about at Wild Health, and contextualizing things, right? So super cool. Is there anything else that you would want anyone to know when they hear you speak on some of these subjects? Like what have we missed that you find super helpful?
I just think the most important thing to understand is that there's a meta map of the course of approaching health. That you need to become aware of what the meta is. Okay. And what I mean by that is, let's go back to this Biggest Loser guy. If he just said, "Oh, if I just known then what I know now." Okay. That's dead center. That's okay. Hey, as you age, you're putting weight on, you're going to look for a solution. Before you do that, you got to understand that there's a weight loss rebound effect and there's a cumulative effect to that. And what most people experience is not the promise, it's the reality of they regain the weight, they get into chronic weight recycling, and then they hit a point in life where they can't drop weight at all. And then weight becomes the thing that sinks the ship because your adipose mass gets hypoxic and you get all kinds of issues. You get cancer, blah, blah, all this stuff. So you got to understand all that before you start the journey, because then you understand how to avoid the potholes and the pitfalls that, example, the Biggest Loser guy didn't know about. And I think that's probably the number one thing is understanding that is a real thing. And it's what happens to most people, understanding the map, the course ahead, and it's what everybody runs into. So
I think what's so tricky about this in real life is people so frequently struggle, and it's just a human condition, I think, of sacrificing short-term benefits for long-term outcomes, right? I mean, there's a reason we have habits, even if they're potentially damaging in certain ways. There's some sort of reward that we're getting, right? So it's such a fascinating subject. I run into this a lot with women when they're undercutting calories too significantly for too long, right?
number one
And
reason they can't lose weight.
yeah, they're losing a lot of weight initially, and then this plateaus because the body's protecting itself and lowering the basal metabolic set point and all of these things that happen. And the idea of putting on more calories to slowly reverse this process is just terrifying for so many women. And maybe it's for men too. I work with a lot of women with this, but this long-term viewpoint of what this is going to do, I get so fascinated by this because knowing the science and knowing the data, in my experience, isn't always enough to drive behavior change, right? Because of that emotional component of whatever reason they chose to go down that path in the first place. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I don't do client stuff really much anymore, but what I can say is that in my experience, number one thing with most people is you got to get them eating more. And then once you get them eating more, they start dropping weight because they're under eating chronically. but it's just, they've been coached that, oh, I can't eat anything. I shouldn't eat anything. And it's like, when you're under calorized, the body will not let go of weight. And, yeah, that's, yeah, I mean, how do you teach that?
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you so much. This has been such a fun conversation for me. I've learned a lot personally, and appreciate the work you've done for a long time now, and excited to see what you come up with next. Where would you direct people if they want to get a hold of your book, your supplements, whatever it is? Where would you direct people if they want to learn more?
So veepnutrition.com is, that's V like Victor, like the vice president, veepnutrition.com, or just my Instagram, real Joel Greene. And then in my, link tree there's all kinds of clicks and stuff that you can look at. So yeah.
I love it. Thanks for coming on, Joel.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to the Wild Health Podcast. If you want more daily health education, be sure to follow us on Instagram, which is filled with health optimization how-tos, grocery shopping lists, guided breathwork posts, myth debunking, and so much more. You can find us at Wild Health MD on Instagram.